Hello and welcome to part 2 of Randomised Gaming's guide to capturing old PC games with an Elgato game capture. And once again, I'm your host for this part, Random Gamer Riven. So this is of course part 2, and in this second part we'll be covering low resolution PC games that run from CD, and we'll also be looking at PC games that no longer support Direct 3D. So to begin with, I'm going to explain the core reason why we don't use open broadcast software for a lot of these PC captures. That is simply because that open broadcast software doesn't support games that use DirectX 9.0C or lower. And that's because open broadcast software was actually built using DirectX 10, which causes a huge incompatibility issue with any of the earlier DirectXs. In fact, from what the official website or Open Broadcast, they directly state they cannot get Open Broadcast software to physically work on anything lower than DirectX 10 due to the functionality of DirectX 10 that it's using. So what that does mean is that you can't use Open Broadcast software to capture any game built for XP, any game built for Windows 98, 95 or ME. Now OBS is a great piece of capture software for the large part, but because of its DirectX capture requirements, it does hinder it when capturing older PC games. And as we mentioned in the first part, while it can capture things like ScumVM and DOSBox, there are many games that the only way you're going to play them at this point in time, because they're not available on online retailers, I'm not going to name them directly, but you know which online platforms I mean. Basically, there are certain games that still aren't available on those platforms, so your only option to own them is to physically buy a disc. And the problem is you then have to install said game, and if you can get it up and running, you've then got to test it out and check that it even plays and everything. And even then, capturing, of course, because it uses an earlier version DirectX, capturing with open broadcast software is a complete no-go. For Elgato, however, that is not an issue. Now, savvy open broadcast software users will know that you can actually capture some of these older games via the Windows system of capture rather than using the game capture. However, this isn't guaranteed to work. And as you'll see I'm going to show you some sample footage, we were able to capture some games using it, but you're then left with the footage in an incredibly small window. So for an example of my first low resolution, I'm actually going to show you footage from the very nice port of the PS1 and Sega Saturn game, Megaman X4. Now, Megaman X4 is of course an old PC game. It was released for Windows 95. It was supported by 98, and I believe it runs on XP, although I don't think I've actually installed it on an XP machine. However, of course, it was only released in 98, and since then it's never been re-released on PC. So, of course, the only way to legally play this game on PC, I should quote, as it's not available on online retailers, is, of course, to own an original disc. And, of course, as it's such an old PC game, it doesn't support DirectX 10, and so there are issues capturing with OBS. So I'm going to show you an example of some of the issues you'll encounter when using OBS when trying to capture Megaman X4. Now, Megaman X4 on the plus side can be captured via open broadcast software. In order to do so, however, you have to use Windows capture, and this is the only way around the DirectX requirements to use Windows capture. You can't use game capture. Basically, open broadcast allows you to set scenes such as Windows, game, and a few others. Now, game will usually, if you select game, it will usually actually bring up the game in the drop-down menu. You can select it. Because these games don't use DirectX 10, when you select game capture in the drop-down menu, the older games will not appear. It can't recognize the program itself. So in this case, it can't recognize Mega Man 4 EXE. As a result, you have to revert to Windows capture. And as I'm going to show you in this pre-done capture that I did on open broadcast software, you have to revert to Windows capture. And as a result, because Mega Man X runs in, I believe, an incredibly small resolution, I'm not entirely sure the exact ratio, but it's certainly smaller than 640 by 480, you get a very small capture window as you see here. And while it captures the sound correctly, it's such a small window, you're going to have to scale it up if you want to use it. I mean, you could upload this small footage to 480p, but on the downside, like here, I've had to capture this. Open Broadcast is set to capture at max resolution, so that's 1920 by 1080, and basically, I'm then going to have to scale the footage up and then crop it afterwards. I could in theory tell Open Broadcast to capture the window size at the original resolution of Megaman X4, but that could present problems in that it may not capture the right part of the screen. So I'm basically setting it to the max screen, but as a result, because the game is run at such a low resolution, open broadcast software just capturing the whole window, I'm left with a very small version of the footage that if I want to get bigger, I'm going to have to cut, crop, and then scale up to the relevant resolution, which is going to cause me a severe amount of image quality loss. And so you may be wondering, how does the Elgato compare? Well, I'm going to show you right here and right now. But before I begin, I should just point out, apologies, I had not set the sound capture up correctly at this point, so there was no audio in this first video. Don't worry, you'll see a second video later on that has full audio that was also captured by the Elgato. Remember, this is a playback of a capture, so you're watching a playback within a capture, if that makes sense. So as you can see from the Megaman X4 gameplay that we captured via the Elgato, it was actually full screen and looked really, really nice. You can probably crop it a little bit. I think the aspect ratio was a teeny bit squished, but that might be because of the rendering ratio the game's actually drawing at. But that video is not going to require too much editing, and it looks really good, and you can pretty much upload that to YouTube from the get-go. It's a really nice bit of footage from Megaman X4. In fact, I could play the whole game using that, capture the Elgato, and we'd get a full screen 1080p playthrough. And it would look really nice, and everyone would be viewing it like crazy, so to speak. So, how does the Elgato do it differently? And I was wondering that myself, and one of the things is because the Elgato, as I've noticed during the capture, well, it's more specifically the editing process appears to upscale videos automatically to 1080p if part of the video is 1080p. So, you'll notice that when the actual resolution start is basically this video is 1080p. The internal resolutions are lower for the games. However, in the processing, it will automatically scale everything up to the same resolution. In this case, 1920 by 1080p. So in the end, you get full screen results of the whole video, and it looks really nice. Now, there is one caveat for this, is that basically you can only work with the exported file, and you must also export the whole file unedited. Or I say unedited, you must export it with at least one section of 1080p footage in it, preferably at the start. The reason being is I did actually attempt to export one video when I had removed the 1080p sections, because basically if you actually go look in Elgato once you've captured a video like this, whether a major resolution changes within the video, you will notice there are splits automatically. Now, usually if it's a locked resolution, there won't be any splits in the actual edit footage. If resolutions change, there will be splits within the video automatically where the resolution has changed. If you delete the higher splits, the video exporter for the Elgato will move automatically to the lower resolutions, and therefore if half your video is at 640 at 1080 and you delete all the 1080 side, the video will export at 640. So be aware of that. The other caveat is that if you do this method, as I found out, now usually the Elgato is really fast to export, even doing 1080p 60 frames of video, so long as they're 1080p 60 frames a second across the whole video. In this case, where it wasn't and the Elgato was having to scale a lot of the footage in the export for this hour-long video took about 2.5 hours. So it's long for these type of upscale videos. That's the only downside. But at the end of it, you're left with a nice MP4 video at 1080p of all your old games. And as you saw in this Megaman X4 footage, it looks really nice. So I think having to wait a little bit longer in the export process doesn't really affect it that much. It only affects you if you really have to get that video out tonight. I personally am always happy to wait because we prefer to make sure our videos are the highest possible quality before we release them. So we're happy for the Elgato to take its time. As long as the end result is, it means we get a nice 1080p video. And certainly in this case, as you've seen here, we've got some great footage of Megaman X4. And if we were to do a full playthrough, we would get a really, really nice video footage. So the results here are really, really good. So just to show you the full capture in action, I'm now going to run the game from disk. As I mentioned, this Megaman X4 actually runs from disk, so you'll see me insert the disk at this point and it will chuck up an error message. The installer by default isn't supported. You might be able to pick up a replacement installer via the web, but when I searched myself for a Megaman X4 default replacement installer, no one appeared to have done one, probably because the PC port isn't that well known and most people are probably emulating either the Saturn or PlayStation version or still playing the Saturn or PlayStation versions directly. I must admit, we've got the US Sega Saturn version, and I much prefer playing the US Sega Saturn version on the Saturn console than playing the PC version. But my first experience of Megaman X4 was actually the PC version. Well, that was the only version I had at the time. It was released in Europe. PS1 version was released in Europe, but sadly the Sega Saturn version was not released in Europe. So I'm just going to basically show you a capture of some additional footage with Zero, a live capture that was done while we did this video just to show you it's all working and the sound's working as well. And I hope you enjoy this quick footage. It's only a quick demo, but again, it just shows you how nice it all looks when it's being captured. For the purposes of the video and for quickness, I will be skipping the intro, sadly. And apologies, but yet again the video editor, as I've been editing the video, has stretched the 4:3 footage into 16:9, but as you saw in the previous playback, it was correctly captured at 4:3. So next up we're going to take a look at another game that runs from this. This time it will be the PC port of the Sega arcade game Last Bronx. Now one reason I want to showcase this one is this one doesn't capture correctly with open broadcast software. As you'll notice when I show you the playback, the frame rate is not correctly captured at the right rate. There are a few other games I tried as well, then some will, even though you can use the Windows capture, open broadcast still won't capture. A few of them I had black screens, but in this case you'll actually notice that I had a very choppy frame rate. So the game in question is Last Bronx, which is this is the arcade version. Basically it was a PC port of the arcade game. The PC version is actually based on the Saturn code, but it included all the missing graphical elements the Saturn's version was missing. It's quite a nice port as well. One downside, well, because this is basically based on the Saturn's version, it used the intros and movies. Sadly, that appeared to be a Windows 9598 codec, and if you try and run it on a Windows 7 machine, I should say, it will unfortunately just crash when it gets to the intro. So you can play it, but you have to skip the intros at every point. Indeed, it even crashes on an XP machine. The intros crash because the codec was purposely designed for Windows 9598. And despite my best research, I've been unable to get the intros to run. The rest of the game runs perfectly. So you can see there, just inserting the Last Bronx disc. Apologies again that I lost the original audio, else you otherwise would have heard me opening the disc there, etc. Now, I don't know quite why it's bringing up the wrong icon at this point. It should be a picture of Red Eye's head. So yep, LBEXE, you just click on it and away it goes. Now again, apologies, this is being stretched into widescreen due to the video editor. But as you can see, Windows 7 PC, and here we are playing Last Bronx, the PC version. And this was set to capture at 60 frames a second, as of course Last Bronx was a 60 frames a second arcade game. In fact, almost every fighting game ever made 60 frames a second, due to give you that smooth animation. Apologies, there's some slight flashing in this video. I think it's because I had a few white windows open in the background, so I don't quite know why it captured. It might be a slight issue, but it was only with this fight as well. The second fight was fine, and in the playback, on my other playback I'll show you in a bit, that was perfect. So as you can see there's me kicking ass as Naga. And just a quick look at the second stage. Again, nicely fluid animation. This actually got more frames than the Saturn's version. The Saturn's version was 30 frames a second, I believe. But see there, looks and plays very nice. Now, to start with, I'm going to go and look at the open broadcast software comparison video that I did. And just to show you, these are the OBS settings that I captured it with. Just to show that I wasn't making a mistake when I was capturing it. So it was set to 1920, it was set to 60 frames a second. And I think I was using about 15,000, 13,000, I can't quite see it, megabits per second. So you get a high quality capture. That's to ensure you get the best possible capture. Ideally on really stressful games up to about 20,000. I know the Elgato does 30,000 megabits per second, which is more than adequate, but it's basically the higher your bitrate is, the faster the game is. So basically, if the bitrate, you need a high bitrate if it's a really fast game. So shooters that have lots of fast-paced animation sprites, they do need very high bitrates, as I've discovered. So this is the Open Broadcast software capture. Again, it's a small window, has a small window issue that you saw with Megaman. And as you'll see, although the frame rate's not ideally that clear because it's such a small window, that it's basically not capturing the correct number of frames, despite the fact it was told to capture 60 frames a second. It looks like it's sort of 20, 25, maybe even 30. But as you can see, the capture's not quite right. Although there's no flashing, you're getting a very small window area, and the frame rate is just, it's not a smooth 60 frames a second. Now, you could take that, blow that up into a video, but it's going to be a very jerky, unpleasant video to watch, and your users aren't going to watch that. Hence why we've been using the Elgato, because that does capture, as you'll see. This last Bronx video, this is the Elgato version capture. And this is the playback again, so that way you see it's not stretched. Again, there's a bit of flashing there. Maybe that's slightly to do with the actual port on Windows 7. Or definitely doesn't happen when I'm playing it without the capture. It might be because I'm actually capturing it at the same time. But as you can see here, the Elgato 60 frames, very smooth, full screen again. It's how Last Bronx was meant to be played. And this is how you want to be capturing and recording videos of it as well. I think because this one's being stretched by the Elgato, the video quality does drop a little bit, but it's still very good. Hence another reason why you want to be using Elgato capture software over the Open Broadcast software for these early PC games. Now, the next topic I'm going to move on to is Direct 3D related games. These are games that prior basically supported old versions of Direct 3D that has since been removed from the newer graphics cards. Now, some people will tell you you can get away with downloading old graphics card drivers that support them. These days, that's highly inadvisable because in all likelihood, most modern Nvidia and AMD graphics cards won't support the drivers. They'll be so old, the drivers, now that most new cards won't support them, so don't do that unless you want an all sorts of nightmare issue. But basically, a set of drivers from AMD that won't support your newer card. So basically, your only option to play a lot of these Direct 3D games basically is they have to have software rendering. Because it's about basically DirectX, certainly 6 and lower, I think even 7 and lower now might not be supported, but basically if the newer drivers don't support them for the graphics cards, so these games will not run under Direct 3D. It does mean you lose some graphical content because you're forced to rely on software rendering. And software rendering, as we knew even back in 98, if you had to software render a game, it didn't look as good as if you were using Direct 3D. But now, as a caveat, at least if you can capture under software rendering, you can still capture and play the game and make a nice video of it. If the game doesn't support any type of software rendering, you're left with the inability to capture a game or even play it entirely. Based on doing some research about a year back, there was a fan-developed system where they were trying to develop a way for newer graphics card to read the old versions of the drivers and DirectX, and it's basically a fan thing. Incidentally, you'll see that pop up. That was because I've inserted Wages of Sin. Now, Wages of Sin, which I've pre-installed, is a game that again doesn't have an installer that runs with newer 64-bit machines. so you're going to need to find a replacement installer. I did find a replacement installer, but the websites we linked to previously in part 1 I'll include again. Now, the one thing that is corrupt, as you saw there in that little window, is the original intro. Apologies on the sound effects here. This is not an issue with my card or anything. This is actually what the original menu sound effects sounded like, with that really grating So basically, with games like this, you have to go into software rendering. Initially, when I actually ran this, it was running in Direct 3D or something. So just to show you, I had to go into here. And initially, all the colours and everything were really badly messed up and completely unplayable until I set the Windows drivers to, as you see, there's software rendering. We've got it set to 1280 by 9 something, so that's quite a decent resolution. Texture quality is on 16-bit, and we want full screen, so we get the maximum screen size. And then I think the scrollers as well are set to the maximum below as well. So this is the best you can do on a Windows 7 PC at this point in time, unless, as I said, that fan project is able to get AMD and Nvidia cards to talk to the older versions of DirectX. But until we have a thing that does make the newer cards able to talk to the earlier version of DirectX, this is how you're left with games like this. Now, basically, as the support software rendering, is that we're able to play Wages of Sin, and this is the Wages of Sin, for those who don't know, is the expansion to the original Sin PC game. It's actually quite a nice expansion. It actually adds in quite a few features like double guns in these modes, so it actually improves the original game as well. And it also has its own new mini expansion. But as you can see there, it's capturing very nice. As it's software rendering, there's some slight wobbleness in the textures, but aside from that, it's actually still looking pretty decent. Yes, Direct 3D, the graphics in Direct 3D do look slightly better, but as you can see there, this is a 98 game. It's running on Windows 7.
Remember, boss, civilians are
Once I tweaked the graphical settings, this was good to go, as they say.
nice shooting, Tech. That billboard ain't getting up.
I never liked that billboard anyway.
Nice shooting, sir.
Now, other games that have the same problem as this are the X-Wing series, and that includes X-Wing, TIE Fighter, X-Wing vs TIE Fighter, and even X-Wing Alliance, the final one in the series. All of them you have to rely on in software rendering, and interestingly, in the new digital downloads of them, the Direct 3D mode has actually been physically disabled. So in order to even use Direct 3D, you actually need to have the original disc versions, which still have that support on that. In case you're wondering, we've actually got TIE Fighter and X-Wing installed via, there was a really great fan website that they'll actually list links to below in the description, that gave me a full-on guide, and basically that enabled me to install it. But sadly, I can only play in software rendering all those classic games because they don't support. Basically, they supported DirectX, as I said, DirectX 6, DirectX 5, DirectX 4, one of the earlier ones that AMD and Nvidia no longer support, so Direct 3D or Direct Draw no longer works.
Clear the bank out, boss. We need to end this.
So my card basically doesn't support the older versions, and I'm basically stuck with software rendering. At least we can play the games, and as I said, the download versions of all the X-Wing series also as well, basically they actually have it removed. So until there's basically a fan fix for the driver issues, you will not be able to play these older games in Direct 3D directly. You'll have to go with software rendering, as you can see here, but software rendering, you know, it still actually looks pretty damn nice. Right, that's everything I'm going to say for part 2. There will be a part 3 probably coming in the not too distant future, possibly next week. Hope you've enjoyed this. Please let me know if you've got any questions in the comments below. As you can see, the Elgato does capture these old games really nicely, as you see there. There will be some demonstrationary footage of Sin captured, although you saw some here. There will be a bit more in the next part. We'll also be looking at trying to get some old games to run that basically they have no documentation on, such as Star Wars Force Commander, which I actually managed to get to run, and a few other bits. But I hope you like what you've seen so far. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please follow our blog on Tumblr if you enjoy it. And of course, you can always follow us on Twitter. And we hope you've enjoyed this video. I am Random Gamer Riven, signing off for now.